The phone rang sharply in the silence, a jarring note that cut through the heavy, still night, and from the first second, the analyst knew this was no ordinary call. He answered cautiously, the faint hum of the city outside doing little to soothe the sudden electric tension that prickled his skin. On the other end, a voice, brittle and almost trembling, whispered fragments of words that didn't quite fit together. An artifact, containment breach, the Pentagon, and a warning that came too late to fully understand. For a moment, he just listened, the room around him utterly ordinary, the soft ticking of a clock, the dim glow of the computer screen, but his instincts screamed otherwise. Something was here, something moving just beyond perception, leaving shadows that didn't belong and silence that pressed like a weight. He could feel the hairs on his neck rise as the voice on the line faltered, then abruptly ended, leaving behind a heavy, pregnant pause that seemed to vibrate through the walls. He sat frozen for a heartbeat, then rose, every rational thought wrestling with a deep-seated unease he couldn't shake. Driving toward the facility felt surreal. Streetlights flickered in patterns that shouldn't exist, and distant sounds, metal clanging, static murmurs, echoed too faintly to place but too loud to ignore. The world outside appeared unchanged, calm, normal even, yet his mind refused the illusion. With every mile, he felt the fabric of his reality stretching, as though the ordinary cityscape were masking something enormous and incomprehensible. Time itself seemed unreliable, a subtle distortion that had him glance at his watch twice within a single minute. Arriving at the facility, the perimeter lights pulsed faintly, as if breathing in sync with some hidden organism. Guards stood rigid, their faces pale, eyes flicking nervously toward the shadows that crept just beyond the edges of light. A low hum vibrated through the air, an almost imperceptible frequency that tugged at his thoughts, unbalancing him, drawing his attention outward. And then he noticed the anomaly, a brief absence of one guard where there should have been presence, a flicker in the corner of his vision that dissolved when looked at directly. His heartbeat quickened, a combination of fear, curiosity, and the undeniable pull of duty propelled him forward. Even as he moved deeper into the compound, the tension remained electric. The ordinary hum of fluorescent lights above blended with faint, erratic pulses of unseen energy. Every shadow seemed poised to reveal something impossible, every quiet moment pregnant with imminent revelation. His mind raced through possibilities, each more implausible than the last, yet each feeling unervingly real. He knew, without knowing how he knew, that the events unfolding here would challenge everything he believed about the world. And as he stepped into the threshold of the restricted wing, a question burned hotter than the fear in his chest. What exactly had called him here, and could he survive the answer? The road to the facility stretched like a dark ribbon through the night, bordered by trees that swayed without wind and shadows that moved with an eerie independence. Every turn revealed another anomaly. Distant flashes of white light reflecting off the asphalt, vanishing before his eyes could fully process them. The usual city noises, distant sirens, occasional cars, were replaced by a thick, unnatural silence, a void that seemed to press against the windshield. Then came the symbols, crudely spray-painted near the facility gates. Jagged shapes, almost hieroglyphic, glimmering faintly in the glow of his headlights as though they had absorbed some residual energy from an unseen source. His pulse quickened. Instinct told him these were not pranks, not even warnings. They were markers. As he slowed at the entrance, the guard standing sentinel appeared almost statuesque, rigid and silent, eyes darting toward something beyond perception. One guard, in particular, caught his attention, facing the shadows just outside the gate, as if watching a presence invisible to everyone else. And then, in a movement so subtle it might have been imagined, the figure simply vanished. 1 second he was there. The next, the space he occupied was empty, the darkness swallowing him without a sound. The analyst blinked, heart pounding, unsure if he had seen a trick of the light or the impossible itself. The facility itself loomed ahead, imposing and sterile, yet it seemed to pulse with life, as if responding to his presence, or perhaps to the stranger who had just disappeared. Flashes of movement flickered at the edges of his vision, figures that dissolved when confronted directly, shapes too fleeting to identify but unmistakably deliberate. The air felt charged, every breath heavier than the last, every step toward the gate weighed with unspoken warning. He gripped the wheel tighter, aware that crossing this threshold was no longer just a matter of protocol. It was stepping into a zone where the ordinary rules of perception might not apply. For a moment, time seemed to halt, the silence so complete it pressed against his eardrums, and he knew the first test had begun, whether he could face what was hidden without retreating. As he reached for the intercom to announce himself, a cold shiver ran down his spine, and the question that had haunted him since the call returned, sharper than ever. What or who was waiting inside, and could anyone ever leave unchanged? The doors to the restricted wing slid open with a whisper that seemed louder than it should. A soft mechanical sigh swallowed almost immediately by the unnerving silence beyond. Stepping inside, the analyst felt the temperature shift, subtle yet undeniable, as if the air itself carried a pulse, a heartbeat he could not place. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting elongated shadows that danced along the walls like restless specters. Military personnel moved through the corridor in hushed, deliberate patterns, their whispers merging into an indecipherable murmur that pressed against his ears, leaving him unsettled. Every step forward amplified the feeling that the world he knew, the rules, the logic, the laws of physics, had grown fragile, warped by some hidden force. Finally, he reached the room. A single reinforced glass case sat in the center, the source of a faint luminescence that seemed to ripple across the walls. Inside rested the artifact. Small, unassuming at first glance, yet undeniably alive in its presence. Its surface pulsed rhythmically, light bending and warping around it as if reality itself were refracting. The analyst felt a pull in his chest, a mixture of awe and terror, his vision subtly distorting when he tried to focus directly on it. Shadows clung to the edges of the room, stretched and twisted in impossible ways, and the soft hum that emanated from the artifact reverberated through the floor beneath his feet. The behavior of the surrounding personnel only heightened the unease. They moved with unusual precision, voices hushed and measured, glances darting toward the artifact that carried more reverence than fear. One officer paused, fingers brushing against a control panel, and muttered words that seemed both warning and prayer, their meaning impossible to discern. Every small sound, the tap of a boot, the faint click of a terminal, echoed unnaturally, warped as though the room itself manipulated reality to draw attention to the object at its center. The analyst's instincts screamed caution, yet curiosity compelled him closer. He noticed subtle distortions in the air around the artifact, almost imperceptible bends that caused straight edges to shimmer and ripple. A thin, metallic taste entered his mouth as the hum grew louder, vibrating in his chest, in his bones, urging both fear and fascination. The walls seemed to breathe in tandem with the artifact, and the whispering voices morphed into tones he could almost comprehend, phrases just beyond the grasp of understanding. He reached out almost unconsciously, yet the moment his hand neared the glass, the room's energy shifted sharply. A sudden flicker of light revealed a figure standing behind him, expression unreadable, then gone as quickly as it appeared. The analyst swallowed hard, acutely aware that this room held secrets meant for no human eyes, that the artifact's presence was not passive, it was probing, observing, testing. And as he lingered, torn between awe and the weight of unspeakable consequences, a question pressed itself into his mind, insistent and terrifying. If you found something this powerful, would you report it, or hide it. The analyst stepped further into the restricted wing, and almost immediately, the air itself seemed wrong, thickened, heavy, vibrating with an unseen tension. He glanced at the wall clock, expecting the familiar sweep of seconds, only to see the hands jerk backward for a heartbeat, then resume forward as if mocking his perception. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floor, detaching from their sources, slipping along walls with deliberate, impossible movement. Each flicker of light revealed more anomalies. Corners of the hallway that bent subtly, edges of doors that shimmered, and a low hum that threaded through the silence, threading itself into the analyst's nerves. A sense of vertigo gripped him, as though the familiar laws of reality were optional here, negotiable at the artifact's whim. He moved toward a secured terminal, discovering files layered in encryption so sophisticated it felt almost alive. Breaking through revealed hidden reports, prior cover-ups, vanished personnel, unexplained phenomena suppressed under layers of official secrecy. Each file hinted at a history far older and more convoluted than the analyst had imagined, painting a picture of systematic concealment. The deeper he read, the more he realized the facility was not merely a storage site. It was a containment zone, a vault of forces humanity had yet to comprehend. His heart pounded, awareness heightened, every sound magnified. A distant metallic clang, the brush of fabric, a whispering echo that seemed to call his name. Then came the subtle, paranormal escalation. A clipboard, resting on a nearby console, shifted slightly on its own, inch by inch, as if some invisible hand were testing his reaction. He froze, breath caught in his throat, and the humming intensified, vibrating not just through the room but through his very bones. Shadows twisted more insistently, bending toward the light, stretching to touch objects that could not move themselves, each movement teasing the boundary between reality and impossibility. Finally, the analyst approached a recording terminal, its screen flickering with static and then stabilizing. The footage showed a figure walking calmly down the corridor moments earlier, but before his eyes, the figure simply dissolved into thin air, leaving only the faintest ripple in the air behind it. He leaned closer, pulse racing, unable to look away as the impossible replayed before him, the realization sinking in. This facility, this artifact, and whatever watched from the shadows were far beyond his comprehension. He stepped back, breath uneven, aware that the second cliffhanger had arrived. Someone was here, and it did not intend to remain confined to recorded history. The analyst had barely recovered from the footage when a shadow moved from the corner of the room, subtle but deliberate, like someone testing the waters before revealing themselves. A figure stepped forward, face partially obscured by the dim glow of the artifact, and spoke in a voice low and urgent, carrying the weight of long-held fear. "You need to know the truth," the insider said, eyes darting toward the shadows and back, as if even this room weren't entirely safe. The analyst's pulse quickened. He sensed immediately that every word would carry consequences far beyond comprehension. The insider revealed a history buried under layers of secrecy. The Pentagon had discovered multiple artifacts, not just this one, scattered over decades and hidden from public knowledge. Each discovery had been carefully catalogued, concealed, and monitored, their powers studied in isolation, away from prying eyes. The artifacts were not passive, the insider explained. They were active, capable of influencing perception, time, even human behavior, and in some cases leaving people changed irrevocably. The analyst listened, horrified and riveted, as the insider described personnel who had vanished, missions quietly terminated, and anomalies recorded but never acknowledged. The stories were punctuated with silence, the kind that pressed against the chest, making it hard to breathe, because every revelation carried the weight of danger. As the insider spoke, the analyst felt a creeping unease. His life, previously defined by procedure and rationality, now felt unmoored. He realized the stakes were deeply personal. If he proceeded, there would be no turning back, no safety, no guarantee of survival, only the relentless pull of knowledge and the artifact's inscrutable gaze. The insider warned him bluntly, "If you decide to go further, you may never leave this wing or the facility alive. And if the truth gets out, you could become a target in ways you cannot even imagine." The words sank like stones, heavy and undeniable, embedding themselves in the analyst's mind, fusing fear with an irresistible curiosity that gnawed at every rational instinct. Outside the window, the night seemed ordinary, but the analyst sensed a subtle shift, a quiet energy that pulsed along the horizon, a reminder that reality itself had been rewritten in this place. The artifact's hum threaded through the room, vibrating in tandem with the insider's warnings, creating a rhythm that was part heartbeat, part machine, part something else entirely. Shadows curled along the walls with unnatural precision, forming shapes that flickered in and out of perception, as if attentive witnesses to the confession unfolding before him. The air felt alive, responsive, charged with anticipation and fear. By the end of the conversation, the analyst's mind was a tangle of disbelief, dread, and awe. He understood, with a clarity that was almost unbearable, that he was no longer merely observing a secret. He had become a participant in a narrative that had been written in whispers, cover-ups, and unspeakable acts of concealment. Every choice from this point carried weight, each decision capable of altering not only his fate but potentially that of anyone who might learn what he now knew. The insider's gaze locked with his, urgent and pleading, as if imparting one final, silent warning. "Would you risk your life to expose what they're hiding?" The question lingered in the room, echoing over the hum of the artifact, and the analyst understood instinctively that whatever path he chose next would define him forever. The tension hung in the air like storm clouds over a city, dense, inevitable, and impossible to ignore. The analyst's eyes were drawn involuntarily to the artifact as it pulsed, light bending and warping in ways that seemed impossible, as though the air itself were a lens for some hidden reality. Then, without warning, the object's glow intensified, and a wave of heat and static washed over the room. His vision blurred, and suddenly he was no longer just observing. It felt as though the artifact had reached into his mind, pulling him toward something vast, something utterly beyond human comprehension. Images flickered before him, alien landscapes of impossible geometry, cities suspended in the sky, oceans that shimmered with colors he had no names for, and beings that seemed intelligent but utterly incomprehensible. Every detail pressed on his senses, overwhelming yet mesmerizing, filling him with a mix of awe, dread, and disbelief. He tried to step back, but his body felt heavy, unresponsive, as if tethered to the artifact by invisible threads. The hum of the object became a voice, not in words, but in feelings. Curiosity, observation, calculation. A terrifying realization gripped him. This was not passive. It was awareness. It had chosen to reveal itself, to communicate, and perhaps even to judge. Shadows in the room shifted as if responding to the visions, and the military personnel froze mid-step, their expressions vacant, eyes wide with an understanding they could not articulate. The analyst's heart hammered as the weight of the unknown pressed against his chest, and he understood that every moment here was being measured, every reaction recorded, every thought parsed. Then came a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the projections. One figure among the visions mirrored his own movements, responding in real time to his gaze, as if the artifact itself were observing him through the lens of its creations. Panic and fascination intertwined, tightening his chest. Could it be sentient? Could it perceive him, and if so, what did it want? He felt an alien awareness brushing against his mind, a silent probing that left questions instead of answers, and an undeniable fear that the artifact's reach was far greater than the room, the facility, or even the planet. He stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of a console, and the vision snapped away, leaving only the artifact's soft pulsing and a room that felt both familiar and impossibly foreign. Yet even in silence, the sensation lingered, the knowledge that he had glimpsed something alive, something that might be aware of him as much as he was of it. The first major twist revealed itself in the depths of his mind. The artifact was not merely a relic or a tool. It was an observer, capable of perception, capable of intent, and perhaps even capable of influencing everything it touched. The analyst's breathing grew shallow as he stared at the artifact, realizing that the line between watcher and watched had been irrevocably blurred. Every instinct screamed caution, yet curiosity anchored him in place, knowing that the next steps could change everything: his understanding of reality, his future, and the very fabric of the world he thought he knew. A whisper of the impossible lingered in the room. Whatever this artifact was, it had awakened, and it was watching him in return. The analyst barely had time to process the artifact's sentience before chaos erupted throughout the Pentagon. Sirens blared with a frantic urgency that cut through the already tense silence, red lights flashing in harsh staccato rhythms across the corridors. Command centers, once orderly and precise, descended into pandemonium as screens flickered, displaying encrypted warnings and garbled messages. Systems failed with alarming rapidity, communications went dark, power surges knocked out sections of the facility, and automated security doors slammed shut, sealing personnel in areas with no explanation. The hum of the artifact seemed to pulse in tandem with the alarms, a mocking echo that underscored the vulnerability of even the most fortified institution. Leaders barked orders into phones and intercoms, their voices edged with panic, but coordination collapsed under the weight of uncertainty. Soldiers ran in tense formations, radios crackling with overlapping instructions, while technicians frantically attempted to regain control of failing systems. Amid the turmoil, personnel began to vanish. One moment, a colleague stood at the edge of the command center, issuing urgent directions. The next, they dissolved into nothingness, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air as if erased from existence. The analyst watched in horror, frozen by disbelief and adrenaline, as entire teams became ghosts, their last movements suspended in the flickering light of malfunctioning monitors. The artifact's influence seemed to extend beyond its containment room, permeating the facility like a living, aware presence. Alarms became irregular, sometimes too loud, sometimes eerily silent, while security footage revealed impossible events. Objects moving on their own, shadows that twisted without source, and flashes of distorted figures that appeared and disappeared in a blink. The analyst realized that the artifact's reach wasn't just physical, it manipulated perception, bending reality subtly but irrevocably, testing human resilience and comprehension. Every step he took brought him closer to the heart of the disturbance, yet also deeper into the labyrinth of confusion, fear, and secrecy. He saw firsthand the human cost of concealment: exhausted officers shouting at each other, technicians collapsing under stress, and soldiers torn between duty and a fear they could not articulate. Conversations fragmented mid-sentence as panic overtook reason, and the weight of unspoken truths hung heavily in the air. This was not just a failure of containment. It was a failure of understanding, a brutal demonstration that knowledge, when hidden and mismanaged, could unravel even the most disciplined institution. The analyst's mind raced, grappling with the ethical and existential implications, his own responsibility entwined with the chaos around him. As the room pulsed with a mix of light, sound, and the artifact's unrelenting presence, the analyst asked himself, trembling, could he trust an organization that hid the truth from the world? And more importantly, would anyone outside survive to know what had truly happened here? The fear was tangible, thick in the air, but so was awe, an awe born not of accomplishment, but of witnessing the fragile boundary between human control and incomprehensible forces, a boundary the artifact had now shattered completely. The analyst stepped into the artifact's chamber, every footfall amplified by the cavernous emptiness that surrounded him. The hum of energy, soft yet insistent, thrummed through the floor and into his chest, a vibration that seemed to synchronize with his own heartbeat. The artifact lay before him, pulsating with a strange rhythm, bending the air around it like ripples in water. Its light danced across the walls, throwing shadows that moved independently, almost like sentient extensions of the object itself. The room, once sterile and controlled, now felt alive, responsive, and profoundly aware of his presence. As he approached, an unsettling realization struck him. The artifact was observing, reading not just his movements, but his intentions, probing his mind with an intelligence that defied comprehension. A thought he barely dared form about revealing its existence to the world echoed immediately in the pulsing glow, as if the object had plucked it directly from his consciousness. Panic and fascination collided, squeezing his chest with equal force. He knew he stood at a precipice. One step could trigger catastrophe. One choice could alter the trajectory of human history. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, demanding clarity in a room where clarity seemed impossible. He tried to steady himself, focusing on what he could control. His eyes traced the artifact's surface, noting how the light warped reality itself, bending the edges of his vision, refracting walls and equipment into shapes that were both beautiful and horrifying. The whispers he had thought he imagined returned, soft, almost melodic, threading through the air, carrying meaning without words. It was as though the artifact was communicating, testing him, weighing his decisions. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet something unnameable compelled him forward. Curiosity and duty entwined in a dangerous ballet. The analyst understood the choice before him. Obey orders and conceal the sentient, incomprehensible force, preserving secrecy but leaving the world ignorant of an entity that might reshape understanding of reality itself, or expose it, risking every possible consequence. He hesitated, caught in a liminal moment where time seemed to stretch and fold, the light from the artifact flickering like a heartbeat poised on the edge of revelation. Every muscle tensed, every thought sharpened. The room seemed to hold its breath alongside him, aware of the weight of the decision. And then it reacted. A sudden flash of light, brilliant and impossible, flooded the chamber, bending space and vision simultaneously. The analyst's body was frozen mid-step as the brightness engulfed everything, obliterating sound and shadow alike. His last coherent thought, a mixture of awe, terror, and an unshakable sense of destiny, was suspended in the light before everything went black. Silence followed, heavier than any sound he had ever known, leaving only the artifact's pulse echoing faintly in his mind, a reminder that whatever had occurred, the story was far from over. The facility was silent now, abandoned and hollow, the echoes of chaos replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed almost deliberate. Lights flickered sporadically, as if struggling to remember their purpose, and corridors stretched into shadows deeper than memory or reason should allow. The artifact was gone, vanished without trace, leaving behind only the lingering pulse of its presence in the air, subtle but insistent, like the afterimage of a memory that refuses to fade. Personnel who had survived the ordeal offered fragmented accounts, each more cryptic than the last. Whispers of impossible geometries, figures dissolving into light, and a sense that reality itself had fractured within the walls. Their words were cautionary, but in their eyes lingered a knowledge that transcended explanation, an understanding of forces far beyond human control. The analyst returned home, stepping into familiar spaces that now seemed alien. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, Every hum of electricity carried a hint of resonance from the artifact, and the ordinary rhythms of life felt intrusive, almost vulgar, compared to what he had witnessed. He was haunted not just by visions of alien landscapes and the incomprehensible intelligence he had glimpsed, but by the knowledge that human perception was fragile, malleable, and easily overwhelmed. Every reflection in a mirror, every passing stranger, felt layered with unseen significance, as though the world had subtly shifted in ways no one else could perceive. Sleep offered no refuge. Dreams blurred with memory. Each night a montage of impossible vistas, alien architecture, and the artifact's pulsing glow. The analyst awoke with the impression that he was being watched, though he was alone. A quiet, insistent vibration lingered in the air around him, a reminder that absence did not equal departure. The experience had changed him irrevocably, embedding a disquieting awareness that the boundaries of reality were far thinner than anyone had imagined. Ordinary life continued, yet every mundane sound, every glance, seemed charged with unspoken potential. He reflected on the survivors' stories, piecing together fragments that hinted at truths the world was not ready to confront. Questions pressed at his mind with relentless urgency. Had the artifact truly left? Was it observing from afar, waiting, learning, judging? Or had it embedded itself into the fabric of existence, an invisible presence now intertwined with human experience? He realized that some truths were too vast, too dangerous to be fully comprehended, leaving only the uneasy sensation of something unresolved, lingering like a shadow across the edges of perception. And so, the analyst lived in quiet tension, caught between knowledge and uncertainty, haunted by what had occurred yet aware that his understanding was incomplete. The artifact's absence was not reassurance, it was a reminder of the unseen, a challenge to the limits of perception. The question remained, do you think it ever left, or is it still watching us? The world seemed unchanged, but in the spaces between thought and shadow, a subtle presence hinted that nothing was ever truly gone. Night had fallen, and the city outside his window seemed oblivious to the events that had unfolded within the Pentagon. Streetlights cast pools of ordinary yellow on empty streets, yet the analyst could not shake the feeling that something extraordinary lingered just beyond perception. Shadows moved at the edges of his vision, subtle and fleeting, and every familiar sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren, the whisper of wind through trees, felt charged, imbued with meaning he could not fully grasp. Though the artifact was no longer physically present, its pulse echoed in memory, a quiet reminder that absence did not equal departure. He sat alone, mind racing through the fragments of experience. Visions of alien worlds, sentient light, vanishing figures, and the unrelenting awareness that he had been observed, measured, and perhaps judged. The questions left by the artifact were unanswered, lingering like smoke that refused to dissipate. Was it truly gone, or simply watching from afar, invisible yet aware? Could humanity even comprehend the intelligence it possessed, or had its presence already altered reality in ways impossible to detect? Every instinct screamed that the truth was larger, darker, and more incomprehensible than he could imagine. The analyst's thoughts turned outward. He wondered if others, survivors, witnesses, or even strangers, might feel the artifact's silent influence, if reality itself had become subtly malleable, bending perception in ways that went unnoticed. The lingering hum in his mind suggested possibility, a presence that waited, patient and calculating. He realized that his story, though terrifying and surreal, was only a fragment of a much larger narrative, one that could extend beyond walls, beyond time, and perhaps beyond human understanding entirely. As the night deepened, the analyst leaned back, accepting that certainty had vanished along with the artifact. Only questions remained, questions meant to haunt, provoke thought, and inspire speculation. And so the video closes not with answers, but with an invitation. Do you believe the artifact left, or is it still watching? Could you detect it if it were here, quietly observing your reality? Share your theories, recount your experiences, and wonder aloud what might be hidden just beyond perception. The final frame lingers, silent and unresolved, a cinematic pause that leaves the audience suspended between fear, curiosity, and the irresistible pull of the unknown, perfectly primed for sequels, spin-offs, or endless discussion.